Today we are continuing on in our series on Leviticus. We spent 3 weeks covering the first half of the book, and we're spending today covering the last half of the book. So there's a lot to cover, so strap in, because it's going to be quite the journey. All right, that's the spirit. That might be the first whoopee that Leviticus has ever gotten in history. Have you ever seen a sign or a warning on a product that makes you laugh or makes you think, what in the world is going on? For example, there was this Vidal Sassoon hair blow dryer that says, do not use while sleeping. There was this letter opener that had the warning sign, safety goggles recommended. Did you know that every Rowenta iron comes with the warning, remove clothing before using? There was a famous, well-known comedian, I think in the mid-90s, that had a whole bit, a whole routine kind of on these weird, strange, funny warning signs. And he said that the funniest part about it all is the fact that somewhere at some point in time, someone did something to make these companies put these warning labels on. As we get to this last half of Leviticus, we're going to be covering a lot of rules, a lot of warnings, a lot of recommendations from God. And kind of the point is the same here, or similar at least, that while these rules and these laws might seem weird and confusing and strange, maybe even funny to us, from our perspective in 2019, the truth is they were necessary, they were needed. And not just because God felt like being arbitrary in terms of his handing out these rules and these decrees, but because God was trying to show how noble and how significant it was for us to be human. Because we are carriers of the divine image. Genesis says that we are created in God's image. And so part of this Leviticus process is us becoming more and more like him, is God's instructions, is God's rules for humans to understand the privilege and the nobility that comes with being the embodiment of the divine image here on earth. And so as we cover some of these rules and some of the themes that we find in this last half of Leviticus, we see that really the driving force of these rules is this understanding of this elevation of the nobility of humanity as we are called to bear God's image to those around us. The main truth for us as we study this morning is that a desire to live well is a desire for justice. God is trying to get us to see through the book of Leviticus, throughout the entire scripture, in fact, that if we really want to live well, if we want to thrive in life, that we have to live justly, that we have to live rightly in relationship to our family, to our friends, to our neighbors, to the animals, to all of creation itself. This is what God is saying. A desire to live well is a desire for justice. And so we come to chapter 17 of Leviticus, and it deals with animals. Particularly, it highlights the significance of animal blood. We read in verses 3-4 this, God saying to the Israelites, if any native Israelite sacrifices a bull or a lamb or a goat anywhere inside or outside the camp, instead of bringing it to the entrance of the tabernacle to present it as an offering to the Lord, that person will be as guilty as a murderer. Such a person has shed blood and will be cut off from the community. In a very practical sense, this command from God was for the Israelites to understand and to better their health. Because we know that when it comes to dead bodies, carcasses, blood, if it's not handled and processed properly, it becomes a hotbed of disease and illness. And so God is giving this very practical command by saying, you know what, you just can't go sacrificing animals anywhere you please. You can't, if you have a pile of bodies there on this person's front lawn and a puddle of blood here on that street corner, it's not going to be healthy for the camp. So you have to bring all the sacrifices to the tabernacle. But in a much grander sense, what we see here is a glimpse into the character of God. Because a lot of people look at the book of Leviticus and they see God's commands for animal sacrifice, and they think, well, this God, he's just a cruel God, not caring about the lives and the blood and all of these animals that are being slaughtered. In fact, a couple of you have come to me and asked me, how can God, who is a God of love, command all of this death and this sacrifice to happen? These animals are innocent. They didn't deserve any of this. And so here we see this glimpse into how God really operates and how God really thinks. And he says, yes, I have commanded you to offer these sacrifices because it's to be a lesson. And I know it's painful. It's painful to me. I am their creator. And it should be painful to you because that is what sin does. Sin creates pain, and dealing with sin creates pain and death. But this is not something that I enjoy. This is not something that I like doing, that I'm just telling you to kill animals for the fun of it. He said the exact opposite is the case. These animals are important. I love these animals. These are my creation. And so I do not want you going around sacrificing, killing animals randomly. Animals are not meant to be killed randomly and consumed randomly and indiscriminately. There is a limit. There are specific guidelines to help you understand this. In fact, the lives of animals are so important to me as God, as creator, that if you do go about killing them randomly and indiscriminately, you are the same as a murderer. Because you are shedding their blood needlessly. And so you will be cut off. Because you are a murderer of my precious creatures. Verse 14 continues and says, you must not eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is its blood. Anyone who eats it must be cut off. God is saying here that in the ancient Near East culture, the belief was that if I ate an animal and I drank its blood, I would add its life force to my own life force. And so I would have an increased capacity for life and for success because I was adding their life force to mine. And God is saying right here, no, that's not how it works. That's not what what needs to happen. You cannot copy the actions and the beliefs of these other surrounding nations, because this is not how creation is set up. You are not going to add anything to your life. There's no additional life force to be found by consuming another life's blood. If you truly want to add to your life force, all you need to do is connect with me. You don't need to consume the blood of another animal. In fact, God is saying here very crystal clearly that we need to honor and respect this fundamental fluid of life. That life itself, as represented by this blood, is precious, it's valuable to God, and that we cannot dishonor it, we cannot ignore it, we cannot not give it the attention and the respect that it deserves, because God is saying all life belongs to me. And all life is precious. So honor that life. Honor the blood that carries that life when it comes to even the animals in your camp. And I think we as a society have really messed up when it comes to honoring the blood and the lives of animals amongst us. with the factory farming and the slaughter that happens, we have really moved away from this primal understanding that God is trying to get his people to understand, to grasp, that the blood, the lives of all creatures are valuable. I knew that factory farming was a problem. I knew that a vast majority of meat in America comes from factory farms, but before I prepared this sermon, I thought it was, maybe in the high 80% percentage. In fact, it's 99%. 99% of meat consumed in America comes from the animals raised in factory farms. Comes from animals that have probably never experienced a day of goodness in their lives. Growing up, I loved meat. And to be honest, I still enjoy meat. But in my mind, I think I had perhaps been self-deluded to think that farms still operated like a cartoon version in the 1940s, where the animals, the cows would go out and graze in the grass and frolic in the sunshine. The birds the chickens would peck the seed along the ground in the yard until they had, lived an enjoyable life and found their way onto my plate. But to see actually how things work, that chickens are barely given enough space to stand up, that pigs are bred in cages where they can't even turn around in, where cows are kept in muck and mire their entire lives. This is horrific. And I know that eating meat or not eating meat is better for my health. It is better for the environment. But the number one reason why I've been making a concerted effort to eat as little meat as possible is because of this. Is because of the ethical and the moral implications that we see here in Leviticus. That we see God saying, all life is precious, and I have given you guidelines in order to honor the preciousness of my creation. And it's not all here just for your uncontrolled consumption. That life comes from a giver, that there is a source. And so that things are used and consumed with a proper respect and a proper appreciation for the system at large, for creation at large. And this is what God is saying. You need to honor all life because it is precious and it is a gift from me. Chapters 18 to 20 move on, and they discuss justice from the community life perspective. They say, what does it mean to live a just life when you're living with your friends, when you're living with your family, when you're living with people of other tribes? What does that look like? How do you live a just life then? Well, chapters 18 and 20, kind of the bookends of this section, really deal quite a lot. This whole section actually has this thrust to it. Verse 3 says, do not act like the pagan people in Egypt, where you used to live, or like the people of Canaan, where I'm taking you. You must not imitate their way of life. Here God is saying, now you're living in community, but you cannot live in community like you used to do and that you saw the Egyptians do or the Canaanites do. You're in the process of reordering the world. This is what Leviticus has been all about. If you're just joining us for the first Sabbath in this series, we've been looking at Sabbath after Sabbath, how Leviticus is this book, how God is taking this group of people that used to be slaves and is making them into a nation of priests. And their purpose now, their calling now is to reorder their lives and to reorder the world itself to better reflect God and His character of grace and mercy and salvation. And so God is saying, now that you're living in community, how is that going to look like? It cannot look like the Egyptians and it cannot look like the Canaanites. You are called to reorder life, to reorder creation. And so here are some practical things that you need to do in order to carry out this calling. And so as I said, chapters 18 and 20, the bookends of this section, have a lot of rules when it comes to sex. And you can go and read them when you get home from church on your own time, perhaps. We don't have time to cover them all in detail this morning. But what is going on here, that with the foundation for all of these specific rules, things to do, things not to do when it comes to sex, the principle that God is trying to impart to the Israelites is the fact that we are not to engage in sexual activity with a large variety of partners. That instead, God is telling His followers that circle needs to shrink. It needs to be a close, tight-knit circle between a man and a woman, specifically between a man or a husband and wife. And why does God even care about any of that? What's the purpose of this principle of having this a tight-knit circle when it comes to sexual activity? God is trying to get Israelites to see that if it's not contained within a tight-knit relationship, if your circle starts to expand and to grow, the larger the circle, the greater the chaos. God is giving these instructions to the Israelites because He wants the families to be stable. Because families were the foundational group of this new nation that God was creating, this nation of priests that God was creating into existence. And He says, if you are unstable at the family level, then you will be unable to live up to this calling that I have placed on you as a nation of priests. For example, one of the commands here in this section of chapters in Leviticus says, a man should not sleep with his father's sister. Another one says a man should not sleep with his brother's wife. Another says a man should not sleep with his son's wife. What do you think would happen if that took place? Spoiler alert, there would be drama. Right? It would throw things into chaos. There would be a lot of tension and fighting, and the family unit would just be completely chaotic if this was to take place. And so God is saying it is important for you as a people, for you as a nation, to be stable at your most fundamental level. Your families need to be stable. And so to do that, keep your sexual activity contained according to these rules and these principles I am giving to you. Leviticus 18 verse 21 says, do not permit any of your children to be offered as a sacrifice to Molech, for you must not bring shame on the name of your God. I am the Lord. We've talked about Molech in several sermons previously. He is the god that demanded child sacrifice. See, back then, most of the cultures surrounding Israel, they practiced an increasing value sacrificial system. So that we think, oh God, I'm a farmer and I need you to bless my crop, so here's some grain. oh, okay, well, the rain, not as much rain fell that I needed. So here, God, here's an animal. Let me sacrifice an animal. Oh, God, I still need a little bit more rain and some more sunshine would help. So God, we need this crop. So take the most valuable thing I have. Take my child. This was the thinking. This was the practice of the surrounding cultures. And here God is saying, no, you cannot do that. I do not want you to sacrifice your children. This is abhorrent to me. We talked about last week how childbirth was the ability that humans have to become most like God. Because that is our ability to create life. And so God is saying, if you take this function, if you take this ability that brings you as close to me as possible, and then you sacrifice that child, what you are doing is creating the utmost distortion of the image of God that you are supposed to be bearing to this world. This is not who I am. This is not how I operate, and you cannot do this either. Verses 27 to 28 continue, and God says, all of these detestable activities are practiced by the people of the land where I am taking you, and this is how the land has become defiled. So do not defile the land and give it a reason to vomit you out, as it will vomit out the people who live there now. Throughout Leviticus, God makes this direct, explicit connection between the behavior of people and the ability of the land to protect and to provide for them. And God is saying, if you do not do these things, if you do not live with justice, then the land is going to spew you out. And we might think to ourselves, well, that sounds kind of like something that's only applicable back to 5,000 years ago to the Israelites. I mean, that doesn't sound like anything modern, or does it? I think we see a very modern example of this truth being illustrated in the examples and the evidence, the compounding evidence of global warming. For too long, humans have been consuming and mining and polluting and stripping the earth's resources without a second thought. To the point where now the earth is saying, look, you have disregarded this connection between your activity and the land. You have disregarded this fundamental creational level of connection that God has made. And now the earth is preparing to spew you out. See, a desire to live well is a desire for justice. A desire to thrive. Do you really want to live well? Do you really want to thrive? Then you have to live rightly in perspective with the rest of creation. If you want to live well, you can't continue to be okay with animals going extinct. If you want to live well, you can't be okay with the continued consuming nonstop of all of the earth's resources. If you want to live well, you cannot thrive when half your state is on fire every year. If you really want to live well, you have to desire justice. Chapter 19 shifts perspectives a little bit, shifts track a little bit. In verse 3 it says, each of you must show great respect for your mother and father, and you must always observe my Sabbath days of rest. I am the Lord your God. Now, we might see this verse and say, well, that's strange. How do you connect honoring your parents with the Sabbath? But what God is trying to get his followers to see, his children to see, is that they need to honor, they need to respect where they came from. They need to honor and respect their origins. He says, this is why you honor your parents, because they gave you specific life through procreation. And this is why you observe the Sabbath, because it reminds you that God has given you general life through creation of the world. And God is saying it's important for you to understand your roots. It's important for you to understand where you came from so that you know your place in this world. That you are not the end-all be-all, that you are not the apex consumer. You are simply a part of this system that I have put in place and that I am sustaining. And in this chapter, we see that famous verse of love your neighbor as yourself. God is saying you need to stop creating labels. You need to stop creating divisions. You need to stop saying this person belongs in this group and this person belongs in that group. He said, because all of you were together as slaves in Egypt. And now you're all together in this new way of living as well. He said, you were in Egypt as slaves and I cared for you. In fact, I delivered you. I set you free. And so now your relationships, how you interact with your neighbors, with your friends, all of that, it needs to flow out of your experience with me. Your ethics, your relationships need to come out of your understanding and your experience of my grace and my salvation. God continues on in verses 33 and 34 of this chapter, and he says, do not do bad things to foreigners living in your country. You must treat them the same as you treat your own citizens. Love them as you love yourselves. Remember, you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. God is saying, look, you all know what it is like to be foreigners. You know what it was like to be abused and taken advantage of. And so now you cannot do that to other foreigners that are now going to join with you. Remember how you were mistreated in Egypt, so now you cannot mistreat other foreigners. Can you imagine what that would be like for a nation of foreigners to start mistreating other foreigners? It'd almost be like a nation of immigrants mistreating other immigrants. And God is saying you cannot do that. You have to love them like you love yourself. You cannot treat them and abuse them. You cannot arrest and deport the parents while their children are at school. And so they have nowhere to go. They have no home to go back to. It says you cannot separate families at the border who are seeking asylum and putting them into cages with a space blanket for their only source of comfort and a few scraps of food, hopefully non-spoiled food, for their sustenance. You cannot treat them that way. You have to treat them like you would want to be treated. You have to love them like you love yourself. Now, do not get me wrong. I am not advocating lawlessness or chaos. But I am saying that there has to be a better way. That we cannot be satisfied treating other people this way. That God is calling us to treat the foreigner, to treat the immigrant as we would want to be treated if we were in their shoes. There has to be a more humane way that better reflects the character of God. Chapter 20, verse 22 says, keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. Here again, God is saying, don't do it. Don't start to live like these others lived. Do not succumb to the way that they have ordered the world. I am calling you to live differently. I'm calling you to order the world according to to who I am, to my character of love and justice and mercy and salvation. And if you do, if you start to take advantage of other people, if you start to abuse those that are vulnerable, if you start to ignore your calling to be this priestly nation, this calling to live a life of holiness, if you start to live like this, then the land is going to spew you out. God says, take care with how you live your life. Live your life with justice. If you really desire to live well, you have to desire justice. This is what it's all about. Chapters 21 and 22 continue with this lengthy list of priestly rules. This is different from earlier in Leviticus where they talked about the priestly rituals. Now they're kind of talking about the nitty-gritty of the priestly life. Kind of how the previous chapters were talking about common people and how they were to live. God says, well, I got some more rules for you as priests because you are to be the model. You are to be the teachers of the rest of Israel. So I have some additional requirements for you. And so God launches into this lengthy list of additional rules for the priests. And in fact, it gets to the point where as we read it, you might get overwhelmed and think, how in the world can anyone follow all these rules? And yet, sprinkled in several times throughout these chapters, God makes this point, as evidenced in verse 15. I am the Lord who makes him, the priest, holy. God is saying, yes, these things are important and we have all these rules for you as priests. You're to be the model. You're to be the teachers. And I want you to follow them. But know that I am the one that makes you holy. Know that if you feel overwhelmed, and I understand if you do, that it's still really not on your shoulders. It's on my shoulders. I am the one that makes you holy. And if you can follow all of these rules all of the time, then great, that's amazing. I'm happy and that's what I want. But that still doesn't make you holy. Checking all of those boxes, following all of those rules doesn't make you holy. I make you holy. This is what God is saying. Don't give up. Don't feel overwhelmed. Because at the end of the day, I am in the business of making you holy. And this process of being made holy is something we call sanctification. And this is important for the Israelites to hear the fact that God repeatedly says, I am the one that makes the priests holy. Because if you think about it, a lot of the Israelites had probably grown up with these newly ordained priests back in Egypt. They had grown up with them and they had seen all their faults and seen all their failures. And now they had been ordained as a priest. You could probably imagine the comment, oh, that guy? He was in my bowling league back in Egypt. He said he had a 150 average, but that buster, he barely broke 100. And so now that guy is a priest? God is saying, yeah, he's a priest. And I am making him holy. I am making that knucklehead holy. And if I can make him holy, I can make you holy too. And if I can make you holy, I can make everyone holy. And this shows an elevated understanding of what it means to be human. That it's an honorable thing to be human, and not just a human that is born to a special family, that is born to the priestly line. But that anyone, that everyone, that the common, average, everyday person, the foreigner, the orphan, the widow, everyone can be made holy. Because God is the one making us holy. And so we come to the final chapter we're looking at this morning, chapter 23. And this deals with the feasts. There are three, well, technically four feasts in the spring. Two are so close together, sometimes they get lumped in as one. And there's three feasts in the fall. They are all organized around the agricultural calendar. And so the spring feasts are there to celebrate the rains that have come and the harvest that is growing. And the fall feasts are there to celebrate the abundance of the harvest that has come in, as well as the understanding that God needs to send rain for the next year, that the cycle needs to restart in order for next year to have a harvest. And Christians for millennia have connected the spring feasts with the first coming of Jesus and the fall feasts with his second coming. You know, the Feast of Trumpets, Jesus is going to come back with a trumpet sound. The Day of Atonement we looked at last Sabbath, when the sanctuary was cleansed and sin was dealt with, and for that ultimate dealing and eradication of sin. The Feast of Tabernacles, where God is going to actually re-tabernacle with us. We're going to actually get to live in his presence once more. And so they make these connections, and we could preach an entire series, 2 series on these festivals and these feasts. But to take a broader overview look of them, what's really going on here is God is addressing the problem of work, the problem of the daily grind. How many of you have experienced the grind of life? Yeah, I see every hand grow up, because that's what it is at times, right? It's just a grind. But God is saying, no, actually, life is not meant to be a grind. God does not see life as a slog. God sees life as a gift to experience pleasure. He says, so if all you're doing is just grinding from one day to the next, he says, you've got things mixed up. You've got things backwards, because this is not how it's supposed to be. Yeah, there's times where you have to go and take care of the normal business of life, which might not always be so enjoyable. But these feasts are a reminder that we are called to immediately come back into these periods of celebration and joy. God is saying that all this hard work, it's not about what you can produce. Your value is not found in how many bricks you can make, like it was in Egypt. God is saying, no, your value is found intrinsically, just in who you are. There is a value of you just being you. And so stop trying to think that you have to go out and slave away to produce value, when in reality, God says, oh, no, all you have to do is enjoy life and to recognize the value in others and spend time with the people that you care about, that love you, that recognize your value. And don't get so caught up in the grind, because that's the way the rest of the world is ordered. That is not how your life is meant to be ordered. And this is why we see repeated throughout this chapter on the feast, this common refrain. God says, during these feasts, you are not to do any work. Do no regular work. Do no regular work. Do no regular work. Do not do any work on that day. Do no regular work. Do you get the point? God is saying, stop it. The grind is not where it's at. Life is meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to be pleasurable. It's meant to be an experience of joy and celebration. How many times do we hear from this world that the expectations are to work and work and work until you're burnt out? And then the world casts you aside and latches on to the next person that can produce and produce and produce. God says, no, it's not meant to be that way. You got to turn things around. It's not meant to go on a daily grind with maybe a glimmer of a break, a long weekend here, maybe a 7-day vacation there. God says, no, life is meant to be enjoyed. Yes, you have to go and make sure your family is fed and your kids have shoes. But you come back immediately to know and to experience and to celebrate the gift and the pleasure of life. God says, do not get so consumed in this work because you're not really making a difference. He says, I'm the one that's making the difference. He says, I'm the one that has created this system. I'm the one that sustains this system. You aren't even a cog. If you were to break, the whole system's not going to come crashing down because I'm the one in control of it here. You are simply here to be a part, to enjoy the system that I have made, to find joy and celebration in the presence of the people that you value, that you love, and that love you. This is the reason why you are created. This is the reason why I have gifted you with life. So if you want to live well, if you desire to live well, you have to have a desire for justice. You cannot just continue to grind and to slog through your day because that is not living well. You cannot continue to put yourself in jobs where the bosses demand that you give 99% of your life to them and to their company, because that's not living well. If you want to live well, you have to care about justice. You have to care about justice in the workplace, of finding that good work-life balance. You have to care about justice when it comes to relating to your neighbor across the street, relating to your neighbor across the globe. You have to care about justice when it comes to your family relationships. You have to care about justice when it comes to the animals. You have to care about justice when it comes to all of creation. Because it is only when you do that that you are truly going to live well, that you are truly going to thrive. A desire to live well is a desire for justice. This morning, I know that I want to live well. I know that I want to thrive. Do you? God calls us to live lives of justice, to live lives in right relationship to the rest of creation, so that you and I can live the lives that we truly want. But we don't get those lives by living in a vacuum, by being selfish, by focusing only on ourselves. If we truly want to live well, we have to care about the justice for us, for others, and for this world. And I hope and I pray that you will answer the call, as I want to answer the call, to live life well and to live a life of justice.